Hello and welcome to this Red Gaming Tech video. Myself and Marta, as always, I'm here with the latest news from the tech world in the last 24 or so hours. Do forgive me, my voice sounds a little scratchier. Unfortunately, I seem to be coming down with a cold or something, but I will try to power through it. So, we're going to start things off with some Nvidia earnings which have been announced today. Here's what we have. They have actually seen an increase in their stock price after they have released these earnings, as they have actually exceeded market expectations. Now, before I go any further, it is important to remember that they did have some cautious expectations following last year, because you may recall that they had a rather significant slump in revenue thanks to the bursting of the cryptocurrency bubble. Now, they have underperformed in a couple of areas, but it's also important to remember that it hasn't been the best time for chip makers or anyone in the technology market, really, just due to the whole thing with the US-China trade war. So what can we take away primarily from their report, first of all? So we see a revenue of 2.58 billion versus expectations of 2.54, so a slight overshoot of their expectations. Revenue is up 16% quarterly, but down 17% annually, and their gross margin is up 1.4% to a total of 59.8%. But let's talk specifics, shall we? Let's talk gaming revenue. That's what most of us are interested in, I would wager. So it came in at 1.31 billion for the quarter, which is actually up from the 1 billion last quarter. But this is still significantly below the 1.8 billion that we saw during the absolute peak of the cryptocurrency craze. So obviously they're still feeling that particular phase's absence. But we do still see laptop RTX sales that are going strong. And overall, Nvidia is moving in the right direction. As I said, at last report, they suffered significant slump thanks to the bursting of the cryptocurrency bubble, as I've already said. So they are moving in the right direction. But what about what they expect for Q3? Because this is all for Q2, of course. Now, they are expecting revenue of 2.9 billion plus or minus 2%, and the margin is expected to increase up to 62%. And one of the key areas that investors are apparently looking for growth from Nvidia and the industry at large, to be fair, is data center. So obviously gaming is going to be a huge thing for Nvidia, but it is very cyclical, to be fair. We are going to see, peaks and troughs, as it were. Obviously we're in the peak at the moment. We just had the RTX Super come out not that long ago. We're expecting some sort of Turing something that I discussed yesterday, Go watch my video if you haven't seen about that already. But obviously as that dies down, we're going to see it start to slowly dwindle off until it peaks again with the release of Ampere or whatever the next gaming GPU series actually is called. Overall, however, this is good news for Nvidia. They are seeing increases where they need to see them. Obviously, data center did suffer a little bit, but we are expecting to see that increase, as I've already said. They are expecting data center to kind of prop them up a little bit in Q3, but we'll have to wait and see as to how true and accurate that actually ends up being. Now, speaking of Nvidia, we actually have some very interesting comments from the Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang about Intel's One API software approach. Now, this actually took place during their Q2 earnings call, and Jensen was actually asked by a fellow by the name of Matt Ramsey whether or not he saw any movement in the competition when it came to data center software stacks. And Jensen was quite vocal when it came to Intel's unified programming model. And here's actually what he had to say, should I say, sorry. He said, quote, "Going from single CPU to multi-core CPUs was a great challenge. Going from multi-core CPUs to multi-node multi-core CPUs was an enormous challenge, and yet, when we create a CUDA in our GPUs, we went from one processor core to a few, to now, in the case of large-scale systems, millions of processor cores. And how do you program such a computer across multi-GPU, multi-node? It's a concept that's not easy to crack." And so I don't really know how one programming approach or a simple API is going to make 7 different type of weird things work together, and I can't make it fit in my head. But programming isn't as simple as a PowerPoint slide, I guess. And I still think it's just time will tell whether one programming approach could fit 7 different types of processors when no time in history has it ever happened. Now, the TLDR on One API is basically, it's a software programming model that will cross architectures and silicon. So obviously we're getting increasingly complex in each area that we generally talk about, CPUs, GPUs, and so on. And obviously, Intel covers basically all of those areas now, especially with the upcoming release of Intel Xe. So it makes sense for Intel to at least attempt this, but it seems that Jensen is, well, let's call it mildly cynical as to how effective it's actually going to be. Whether or not he's right, unfortunately, it's just going to be a matter of time, as he himself says. He does fairly leave the window open for there to be a possibility. There could be something that Intel is working on that he just isn't familiar with, something that he and his team hasn't thought of, but he seems to think that this is a gargantuan task that at present isn't possible. So take his comments with a pinch of salt, because of course he is talking about a company who are now trying to be a direct competitor. But I do find his comments quite intriguing, and I'm definitely curious to see the future of One API. So let's finish up our Nvidia segment now with a disappointing news for any fans of Assetto Corsa. Now, you may recall that Assetto Corsa was listed as an RTX-ready title back when we first saw the reveal of the RTX technology, and unfortunately, that seems that it's no longer the case. Ray tracing is no longer coming to Assetto Corsa, according to a post from the developers on the Steam forums for the game. So a direct quote from them is, quote, "Our priority is to improve, optimize and evolve all aspects of ACC. If after our long list of priorities, the level of optimization of the title and the maturity of the technology permits a full-blown implementation of RTX, we will gladly explore the possibility. But as of now, there is no reason to steal development resources and time for a very low frame rate implementation." Now, this is disappointing news. Personally, this game is so not my thing. It's not even funny. Like, racing games and we just don't get on. Unless your name's Burnout, we're not going to get on. But it's still disappointing that this is not going to get ray tracing anymore, given that it was advertised as such. But I can't really blame the developers if they don't feel it's worth the time, manpower, energy, and all this, versus the amount of people who are going to play it, and they seem to think it would not get them reasonable frame rates. Then I can't really blame them too much for being like, do you know what, guys, it just isn't worth it. But it's just a bit of a shame in multiple ways, even if you don't play the game, because the amount of games that have RTX support is still really, really small. We have yet to see the implementation and the widespread use of it. Probably because the RTX cards, while they're a bit better now with the Super Series of price versus performance, they're still quite expensive, and ray tracing is still really demanding, and even with the top-end card, you are still going to be having issues, especially if you've got everything maxed with ray tracing, as has been discussed ad nauseum. So, a bit disappointing, but I can't really blame the developers. It is a little bit annoying that it was advertised as having it, and now it's not, but I appreciate their honesty, I guess. Anyway, we're going to move on now to AMD, as we have some very interesting binning statistics from SiliconLottery.com. So, as we all know, Ryzen 3000 has been on the market for basically a whole month. My, how the time does fly. How is it already mid-August? Seriously, guys, I don't know. I don't understand where the time has gone. However, SiliconLottery.com has now shared binning statistics for Ryzen 3000. So, what does this actually mean? Basically, the percentage of a certain type of chips were able to hit the clock speeds that you might expect, and you'll see what I mean as I go forward. So, for the 3900X, which is the 12-core, 24-thread chip, Silicon Lottery said that only the top 6% of samples were able to hit 4.2 GHz at 1.25 volts. It gets a bit more promising even at a loss of 0.05 GHz though, as at 15 GHz should I say, we see the top 35% able to hit this at 1.237 volts, and top 68% were able to hit 4.10 at 1.225 volts, and the top 87% were able to hit 4.5 GHz at 1.212 volts, and all Ryzen 3900X processors were able to hit 4 GHz at 1.2 volts. So it just goes to show you how even a small increase from 4.15 to 4.20, all of a sudden you are talking the top end of the top end that can only hit that in this particular processor line. As for the 3800X, we see the top 20% of samples able to hit 4.3 GHz at 1.3 volts, top 53% able to hit 4.25 at 1.287 volts, while all samples overclocked to 4.20. As for the 3700X, should I say, the top 21% of samples were able to hit 4.1 GHz at 1.26. Top 74 samples were able to hit 4.10 GHz at 1.25, and all samples can overclock to 4.05 GHz, 1.237. Still though, these are some very impressive results from AMD. I have to say I am impressed. 35% able to hit 4.15 and 68 at 4.10 is not too shabby at all. So if you win the Silicon Lottery, you could get a pretty nice overclock on the 3900X, and of course across the 3800 and 3700 as well. We see the top end be a little more attainable, but still, just goes to show you how overclockable Ryzen 3000 actually is. It's pretty damn nice if you ask me. You will find a link in the description below this video to Silicon Lottery's post, and you can see for yourself the statistics that I've just read off to you. There is a bunch of Skylake stuff in there as well, so if you want to see what's going on with even older chips, they've even got Broadwell on there just for example, but you can see a bunch of stuff on there that I haven't discussed, so you will find the link in the description below this video. Anyway, that is me done for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, your support is highly appreciated. Do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Just about a great deal, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.